On the 22nd of November 2012, American journalist James Foley and British journalist John Cantil were driving through Idlib province in northwestern Syria in a local taxi, accompanied by their Syrian translator and the taxi driver. Approaching the Turkish border, they were intercepted by another vehicle, whose occupants, affiliated to an unknown militant group, forced Cantil and Foley out of the taxi at gunpoint, bundled them into their own car before driving away from the area, leaving both their translator and the driver alone in the taxi. What happened to the two journalists afterwards isn't clear, although it's known at some point in 2013 they were handed over to IS and became part of a group of foreign prisoners being held by the terrorist organisation. By January 2014, this group had grown to a total of 24 hostages from 13 countries, all of whom were being held for ransom and included American aid workers Kayla Mueller and Peter Kassig, American journalist Stephen Sotloff, and British aid workers Alan Henning and David Haines. For months, the respective countries of the hostages worked together to locate the whereabouts of the group, but it wouldn't be until the spring of 2014 that progress began to move forward, when the 3 Spanish and 4 French hostages had their ransoms paid and were released by the Islamic State. On their return to their home countries, the 7 former prisoners were interviewed and questioned about their time in captivity, which led French and British intelligence to identifying several areas around the city of Raqqa in northern Syria as the possible locations of the hostage group. However, despite being briefed on the intelligence, the US government did not follow up on it, with an American government official claiming that the US intelligence agencies got the information but didn't trust it. They wanted to develop and mature the intelligence because it wasn't our own. Subsequently, in June of 2014, the same month that the US-led coalition began its aerial campaign against the Islamic State, the FBI sent several teams to Europe to question former IS prisoners, which allowed them to draw up a possible layout of the compound, which they concluded to be somewhere to the southeast of Raqqa. According to the family of James Foley, this was the same area the French had identified 3 months previously. Following their task into Europe, the FBI handed their findings over to the US Department of Defense, who, over the next few weeks, were able to use satellite surveillance to pinpoint the suspected building the hostages are being held in, which is located in the town of Al-Akirshi. However, by the start of July, the intelligence available was considered very weak and likely out of date, with the possibility of the identified building not being used anymore. These fears were reinforced by the fact that a further 8 of the prisoners had been released between May and July, whilst one, Sergey Gorbunov, a Russian engineer, had sadly been killed in April, meaning that only the 4 Americans, 3 Britons and 1 New Zealander were left in the group. As one US intelligence officer pointed out, the Islamic State must have realised that when they let the hostages go for ransom, stuff was inevitably going to get out. Despite these concerns, US military officials assessed that this was the best chance the international coalition had come to finding the hostages, and there was the greater worry that such an opportunity may not arise again in the future. Consequently, after being briefed on the situation by his security advisors, US President Barack Obama authorised a rescue operation to recover the remaining 8 hostages. This operation was to be carried out by approximately 20 operators from Delta Force, who would have an attached Jordanian Special Forces operator with them acting as an interpreter, whilst a detachment of Rangers from the 75th Ranger Regiment were to establish a security perimeter around the target building. Tasked with airlifting the ground troops to the objective would be the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Unfortunately, the type of transport aircraft they used isn't confirmed, although it's known to have either been the standard MH-60M Black Hawk helicopter or the MH-60X Silent Hawk helicopter, the latter being the stealth variant of the Black Hawk, which was infamously used during the Bin Laden raid in May of 2011. In addition, the 160th were to deploy 2 MH-60L Black Hawk direct action penetrators, the gunship variant of the Black Hawk helicopter, to provide an armed escort for the transport fleet and close fire support once the troops were on the ground. And finally, aerial support to the operation was to be fairly substantial, with 1 AC-130 gunship and 2 MQ-1 Predator drones providing overhead support, whilst an unknown number of US fighter aircraft were to be on standby if needed. Unfortunately, the model type of the fighter jets used hasn't been disclosed to the public. Between 0100 and 0130 on the morning of the 4th of July 2014, the task force took off from a forward operating base in Jordan and headed for their objective. Flying north into Syria, the ground element was preceded by a couple of US fighter jets, which carried out preliminary bombing runs against known Islamic State positions in the vicinity of the target area, before the helicopters arrived over Al-Akirshi at approximately 0200. On their arrival, the helicopters came under both small arms and RPG fire from IS militants located near the target building, with one of the US pilots being hit by a stray bullet in one of his legs. Nonetheless, under covering fire from the 30mm cannons mounted to the Black Hawk DAPs, the ground troops were able to get onto the ground and begin returning fire, during which 8 IS militants were killed and one of the Delta operators was lightly wounded. It's also reported that the attached Jordanian operator was also injured in the firefight. The main evidence for this claim comes from a piece of military uniform covered in blood and bearing the Jordanian flag that was recovered by IS militants after the operation, potentially indicating that he was wounded in one of his arms. However, this has not been officially confirmed. With the ground threat neutralised, the Rangers moved forward and sealed off any approaches to the building, with one detachment establishing a roadblock on the road leading to Raqqa, whilst the assault teams from Delta Force, each consisting of 4 men, got into position and breached into the target. Storming into the building, the operators began methodically clearing each room and floor level, but found no sign of the hostages or their captors, and after searching under floor rugs and behind wallpaper in the hope of finding a hidden room, the senior Delta Force commander on the ground declared it a dry hole, the Special Forces term for an empty objective. Meanwhile, the overhead support assets began observing heavy IS troop movements to the south of Raqqa, indicating that nearby Islamic State units had been alerted to the presence of the American force and were sending reinforcements to the area. A journalist who was embedded with IS at the time and was staying in Raqqa on the night of the operation recalled, "I was awoken by the sound of gunfire and explosions in the distance. Those militants who were with me strapped on their explosive belts, grabbed their rifles and rushed out without uttering a word." Circling above and monitoring these movements, the AC-130 gunship opened fire on and destroyed a column of IS troop vehicles that was heading for Al-Akirshi. At the same time, back inside the target building, the troops over the next hour began collecting anything that could shed light on the whereabouts of the hostages, including cell phones, paperwork, clothing, blankets and half-eaten meals, before rendezvousing back outside, loading onto the helicopters and making their way back to Jordan, which they reached just before sunrise on the 4th of July 2014. On their return, the items recovered from the target were handed over to the FBI, who, after carrying out forensic tests, found the DNA of the hostages on some of the items, including that of Kayla Mueller and James Foley, indicating that the right building had been hit, but that at some point the hostages had been relocated to a new safe house. It was later estimated by US intelligence that this relocation had been carried out between 24 and 48 hours before the launching of the rescue operation. Whether this was just pure coincidence or the Islamic State had received a prior warning of the impending operation isn't known, but it would mark the final time that coalition troops would be able to mount a rescue attempt to save the hostages.